A Pyrrhic victory. A day after the Panthers organized this unprecedented hearing, which forced the judiciary to tacitly admit to its conspiracy to imprison poor people of color through bail, they were back in criminal court, standing trial for allegedly conspiring against the state. The prosecution's case hinged on testimony from three boss agents. Before posing as a Panther, Eugene Roberts had successfully infiltrated Malcolm X's fledgling Organization of Afro-American Unity and had served as Malcolm X's bodyguard on the night of his assassination. Due largely to his military experience, Agent Ralph White had swiftly climbed to the position of section leader in the Bronx office of the BPP. Carlos Ashwood, also known as Carl Wood, had been serving as an insurance auditor before joining the NYPD and infiltrating the party in the summer of 1968, before many of the defendants did. Collectively, the testimony of these star witnesses revealed that the Panthers studied revolutionary tactics, used incendiary rhetoric, and engaged in ongoing preparations for armed self-defense. However, the evidence they presented fell far short of proving that the Panthers planned to carry out the violent bombings and assassinations for which they were accused. To the contrary, as the trial progressed, a picture emerged of an organization riddled with agents provocateurs. An agent provocateur, writes Viktor Kaledin, a Russian intelligence expert, is a police agent who is introduced into any political organization with instructions to foment discontent against the government or to fake a case in order to give his employers the right to act against the organization in question. White testified that he had participated in efforts to recruit people into the organization and that he instructed various Panthers in the use of weapons, including methods of constructing time bombs. Roberts testified that he had played a key role in organizing reconnaissance missions on the alleged bombing targets, and in one of his reports described White, who he did not know was also an agent, as the most militant of all the Panthers.
5-hour summation, probably 3 hours was on Ralph White. Gene Roberts, during my cross-examination, the Panthers were very hot to get me to accuse him of participating in Malcolm's murder, which they believed that he was there to make sure he was dead. So my cross-examination led up to, there was always police presence at Audubon when Malcolm spoke. It's a big auditorium. But there wasn't anybody there that night. No cops, nobody checked for anybody's guns, nothing. And the whole thing was a plan. And you were there to make sure he was safely dead. And Gene Roberts went crazy when he was accused of that because he actually cared for Malcolm. He got to know him. And he sort of flipped in the middle of his examination. He became from pro-government to pro-defendant.
Ashwood testified that he helped construct a bomb with the assistance of an unindicted accomplice, leading one juror to proclaim that the only corroborated act of insurrection offered during the entire trial was carried out by a cop. I love that. Finally, on May 13th, 1971, the jury, composed of 6 whites, 5 blacks, and 1 Puerto Rican, 11 men, and 1 woman, began their deliberation. Most expected that after a protracted legal struggle that lasted 2 years, involved more than 60 witnesses, and cost the city more than $2 million, that deliberations would amble on for weeks. Instead, the jury reached their verdict over pastrami sandwiches.
The jury went out and all the lawyers went to lunch. And we were at this place right across the street from the courthouse down the block. And they knew us because we would come there often. And we were there 90 minutes and we got a phone call. Come back to court. Jury had a verdict.
They re-entered the courtroom 90 minutes later, having unanimously agreed that although the state had constructed a compelling narrative of the Panthers as bloodthirsty terrorists, it had offered little to no evidence proving its claims. Amidst raucous cheers from the audience, the jury foreman uttered not guilty 156 times.
The foreman was a black man, looked like he was in his 50s. He was a conductor. During the voir dire, he said he worked mostly in Europe. Now, to us, that meant he couldn't work in the U.S. The government didn't see it. He was tough. He knew what racism was. He worked in Europe because he had to work in Europe. And he pounded those not guilty verdicts. It was like a hammer on the heads of the judge and the prosecutors. Not guilty, not guilty. It was heavy. They were dancing in the streets of Harlem. It was big. Front page of the New York Times. And, you know, there were several of the 21 who walked out of the courthouse. Others had other charges pending. Some didn't come out. Some had never been captured. Sekou appears much later. Some of them were too young to go to trial. So only 13 of the 21 went to trial. And the others were never tried.
Liberal analysts celebrated the acquittal as an illustration of judicial impartiality. Yet, it is important to recognize that for the Panthers, the outcome of the trial was a Pyrrhic victory. Although they were exculpated in a court of law, the state's legal attack deprived the organization of some of its most capable leaders, drained it of financial resources, and forced many of its members into hiding. The Panthers had argued all along that these strategic effects, and not the dispassionate administration of justice, were the primary aim of the prosecution. Moreover, acquittal offered no protection against ongoing extrajudicial surveillance, harassment, repression, and violence. While the Panthers were fighting for their lives in the jails and the courts, the FBI was stoking tension within the national organization. One result was that in February of 1971, the BPP ruptured into contending factions, and BPP co-founder Huey P. Newton expelled the entire Panther 21 from the party. An ecstatic J. Edgar Hoover subsequently informed his field agents that, quote, this dissension, coupled with financial difficulties, offers an exceptional opportunity to further disrupt, aggravate, and possibly neutralize the organization through counterintelligence, end quote. Deploying a commonly used tactic, the FBI constructed a poison pen letter designed to exacerbate strained organizational, political, and interpersonal dynamics. Made to appear as though it was sent from Myra Bennett, with whom Setawayo Tabor had 2 children, the letter taunted Newton for allowing Set to flee to Algeria with Connie Matthews, Newton's personal secretary, who is blithely referred to as, quote, that woman of yours, end quote. Hoover hoped the letter would, quote, cause Huey to again strike out at the Panther 21, further causing the rift between him and those sympathetic with the NY21 to be widened, both black and white, end quote. Although the Bureau's machinations clearly played a role in the debilitation of the BPP, these tactics were effective because they exploited contradictions that existed within the organization. The authoritarian structure of the national hierarchy, the adherence by key members to patriarchal norms of relating to women, and its failure to mobilize effective security and communications protocols rendered it vulnerable to FBI attacks.
On May 19th, 1971, on what would have been the 46th birthday of Malcolm X, 2 policemen who were guarding the house of New York District Attorney and Panther 21 prosecutor Frank Hogan were shot. A group calling themselves the Black Liberation Army took responsibility for the action in a communique that was distributed to the press. All power to the people. Here are the license plates sought after by the fascist state pig police. We send them in order to exhibit the potential power of the oppressed people to acquire revolutionary justice. The armed goons of the fascist government will again meet the guns of the oppressed third world people as they occupy our community and murder our brothers and sisters in the name of American law and order. Just as the fascist Marines and the army occupy Vietnam in the name of democracy and murder Vietnamese people in the name of American imperialism are confronted with the guns of the Vietnamese Liberation Army, the domestic armed forces of racism and oppression will be confronted with the guns of the Black Liberation Army, who will meet in the tradition of Malcolm and all true revolutionaries. Real justice. All power to the people. The following is part of a recorded conversation between then President of the United States Richard Nixon and the head of the FBI J. Edgar Hoover. The conversation is about the May 19th shooting and leaked following Nixon's famous Watergate scandal.
There you are, sir.
Edgar?
Yes, Mr. President.
You're probably way ahead of me, but may I tell you that in terms of the New York situation, at this particular time, since these people have not been apprehended, the national security, information we seek is unlimited.
Yes.
Okay?
It's okay?
Yes.
On that line,
And you tell the Attorney General that that's what I've suggested and ordered, and you do it. Okay?
I'll do that.
Don't you agree with this?
I agree with it thoroughly.
By God, let's get these bastards.
And the agent in charge of my New York office told me he attended both funerals today.
Good.
And saw the commissioner and conveyed to the commissioner, as he had previously on to the other high officers there at New York, that the full facilities of the FBI were available.
Good. And then we'll follow that up with on their recommendation, with a meeting of, say, 100 top police and sheriffs from around the country.
We have that scheduled for the following Monday.
Right.
Already.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Good. Oh, you have?
Oh, yes, indeed.
That's great. That's the way to work.
Yes.
It just sickens me to see people shooting policemen in the back.
It does.
Doesn't it you? Of course it does you, but it does me as just an ordinary citizen. The New York Times will probably write an editorial pointing out that the guy that shot him was raised in a bad neighborhood.
It'll be poverty, yes.
That's right.
The slums of New York.
That's right.
Contributed to it.
That's right.
Housing and all that sort of thing.
But that isn't the reason. These people are bad people.
Of course not.
Right. Okay, Edgar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hoover instructed the New York FBI office to intensify investigations of the Panther 21. Thus, for many of those involved, the grueling ordeal was but an episode within a much longer biography of struggle. The split within the BPP and ongoing state repression birthed the Black Liberation Army, an underground political military formation heavily populated by veterans of the beleaguered New York chapter.
In 1973, Dhoruba bin Wahad, who had fled to Algeria with Connie Matthews and her new husband Michael Setawir Tabor, was given a life sentence for the shooting of the officers outside Frank Hogan's house on May 19, 1971. In 1990, after serving 19 years of this sentence, Dhoruba was released when it was found that the prosecution had withheld evidence that would have helped Dhoruba's defense. Dhoruba will go on to sue the state and the FBI for his wrongful conviction, and this forced the FBI to release 300,000 pages of COINTELPRO documents to Dhoruba.
In 1974, Sundiata Acquittal, another Panther 21 defendant, was sentenced to life in prison for the killing of Werner Forster the previous year. The shootout that claimed the New Jersey state trooper's life also resulted in the wounding and capture of Assata Shakur and the killing of Zaid Malik Shakur. Acquittal, bin Wahad, and the Shakurs were members of the BLA. During a recent conversation about these events, Dhoruba bin Wahad told me, "These kids struggling today don't have to reinvent failure. When they say they want to empty the jail and dismantle the prison industrial complex, they need to go back to the struggles of the people who actually did that." End quote. One of the key lessons to be learned from this history is that revolution is illegal. Revolution is criminalized because it necessarily entails destroying law. Understanding this means that contemporary activists cannot expect a government that facilitates the coercive dispossession of economically impoverished communities of color across the nation and the world to facilitate, legitimate, and reward radical struggles to transform, undermine, and abolish the state as it is currently constituted. The Panthers paid and continue to pay a high price for the militant forms of struggle in which they engaged. They made several mistakes and miscalculations. However, many of them want us to understand that their sacrifices were worth it, if only to set an example for future generations.
As the 60s drew to a close, new African and Third World nationalities made up nearly 50% of the prison population. National liberation consciousness became the dominant influence behind the walls as the overall complexion neared the changeover from white to black, brown, and red. The decade-long general decrease in prisoners, particularly whites, brought a drop of between 16,000 and 23,000, while the total number of new African prisoners increased slightly or changed insignificantly over the same period. Yet the next decade would begin the period of unprecedented new prison construction, as the primary role of U.S. prisons changed from suppression of the working classes to suppression of domestic Black and Third World liberation struggles inside the U.S.